This year I'm going to try and overcome the watering challenges that I have. So my allotment has no water on it whatsoever. Everything that we gather is either by rain or one of the neighbours locally who's happy for us to run a hose to a nearby container. And I'm very fortunate because I get the opportunity to run a hose from a house that's very close to my allotment, and I can fill the two main IBC tanks that I use. But I want to find ways this year of improving upon that. Meanwhile, I think the biggest challenge I have is keeping the polytunnel watered because of the obvious additional warmth. So I'm going to do two things this year to try and mitigate those watering challenges, and I'm going to show you one now and we'll get on to the other one in due course. So I'm going to do a dry run, as it were, in the polytunnel. I've cleared my bench mainly. I've still got these two trays and a couple of bits and bobs to clear, but the challenges that exist in the polytunnel are both at this level and of course lower down. So I'm going to tackle today the bench and how I water the plants that I put on the bench. So under normal circumstances I cope quite well watering the polytunnel, but this is really about two things: being able to water the tunnel when I'm not here, and there are times when I'm away for 2 or 3 days that I just can't call on other people to do the watering for me. So it's how to crack that one. And also it'd be nice to have a little bit more automation so that plants got what they need all the time and there weren't any dry spells. So these are the components I'm going to use. First of all, I'm going to use these large trays, and they play into what I'm about to do. So I've got two of those, and I'm going to have one at each end, and they're going to hold the bulk of the plants. Now, bearing in mind what I normally have on this bench during the heat of the summer is peppers, and maybe this year some smaller dwarf tomatoes. So it's important that they're not too wet, but they keep a constant flow of water available to them if they need it. So I'm going to achieve that by using capillary matting, but I've got to work out how to displace the water across that matting, and that's going to require this smaller tray which I've had for a long time. So a 3-tray setup. I'll show you what happens next. So this tank, which I've had for a long time and I've not used particularly productively, is going to be the reservoir for the water. And the idea is that I fill this to whatever height of water I think is suitable. It's more about what the bench can take in terms of weight, really. And then this has a tap on it, and what I want to do is turn that tap so that it just drips very slowly, and I'm going to put it on the bench and allow it to drip on the capillary matting. And then the plan is that the water will dissipate across both of the trays. So let's set it up and see how it looks. So this is the capillary matting, and I bought, I think, 6 meters, which is way too much, but I've got some need for this in the house. And this is 1.56 meters wide, which is perfect for this sort of tray. And you've got to shop around for this stuff. You can pay a lot of money for it, and you can also get it on the roll from a few suppliers at quite a reasonable price. I ended up paying £1.69 a metre, which I thought was very reasonable compared with what I saw elsewhere. So I've decided that I'm going to use one large strip and make it do everything I need it to, because I think that'll help the movement, the capillary action of the water through the mat. So I'm going to round off this edge and then lay this out and see if I can get it working. So I just need to cut a straight line here because the person who cut it on the roll cut it on a fair old angle, and then I can start to fit it. Okay, here we go. So start up this end, get right to the end. So this is going to act as the reservoir, this tray, and what will happen is the water will pool in this tray and then work its way over and into this tray and up to the end, and exactly the same for this tray. So I'm just going to get enough slack in here to get it over the top and then roll it out to the end of this tray and cut it. So I think that's about right. And now I'll put this tank that I've got into the middle. And I guess you could use any sort of water container as long as it had a tap or a method of dripping. So that's how it's going to sit. And I've just got to get this so that it drips reasonably constantly and then see what works. So if it were to fill up, it would overflow from this reservoir and not fill these with water. At least that's how I think it'll work. And that's important because if I do get this wrong, then I don't want the plants waterlogged for a number of days. So this would be the only part of the setup that would actually fill up with water. So it's dripping away there nicely, and my hope is that it will just fill out both sides. We'll come back to it later in the day and see if it's worked out. So as I say, this is a dry run and I'll be collapsing all this so that I can get on with my sowing. But I needed to be ready because when you need to water the polytunnel because the weather's got really warm, you need to be prepared. Now the other day I made these metal hoops from trampoline parts, just a couple of them, but they rely upon these sleeves that join together these pieces of mild steel, and I didn't have enough of the grub screws to secure them properly. So I'm a bit anxious that as they're under tension they could just ping out and cause an injury. So I'm going to tape them up with some electrical tape, and that will be weatherproof and hold them in place, I'm sure. So I'll keep looking for those grub screws of that size, but it certainly seems to be quite an awkward size. And I think this will make them that much safer. There's one, and I've got another one to do over there. Well, it's that time to put my bird feeders back up. Now, I normally keep this in the garden during the winter, but we've got a lovely population of goldfinches that live around here and feed from the allotment on a regular basis. So I like to feed them in the summer. So I'm going to put the bird feeder on there, and I normally feed sunflower seeds because they don't germinate if they fall into the land. So that feels a bit low. You need to watch out for cats. So I think I need to find somewhere with a little bit more height than that. I'll have a look around. So this is where I had a feeder last year, and I think I'm going to put it back in here because he certainly enjoyed the cover. from the pear tree. There we go. And it's not in the way. And then they can land on the various branches and find their way to the feeder. Perfect. Now, one of the maintenance jobs that I've got to do is the lid for this cold frame. I made this from scratch and I put on it these frames to hold the perspex in, but it seems to want to come apart regularly on this corner. So what I'm going to do is just put some of these metal brackets around the corner and fix it, and hopefully that'll hold it in place good and proper. And I'll do exactly the same on the other corner, because whilst it's not been a problem so far, you know how it is. As soon as I fix this one, the other corner will be the same. So let's see if we can get these little metal brackets in place. Just about reaches to the wood the other side. That's one. That's two. Just for good measure, I'll put a third one in. Now I'm starting to think about runner beans. Now the last 3 years I've been plagued by high winds. One year I've done wigwams. Unfortunately a couple of those blew down. Last year I did a traditional strip and pyramid with a whole bank of beans either side, anchored with ties on each end, and well, let me show you what happened to those. Pretty much the same as they were the last time we had the storm, just 2 or 3 days prior. So I've been on the lookout for scaffolding bars, because I've seen those used very effectively and used in the traditional bank of beans method, but they add so much strength, of course. Unfortunately, I've not been able to find any of those. But in a local DIY store a week or two ago, I found something I thought would do the trick. I'll show you. So these are sold as fence posts, and as you can see, they're about 8 foot high. So I'm figuring that if I can get a foot into the ground, I've got a 7 foot high pole. And if I use 2 of them on an angle, I can cross them over and make a really rigid and very strong prop for all my bean canes. I've just got to find a way of fixing them at this point. So I want to get a measure. My beans are going to go into this bed, and there's always going to need to be a bit of leeway in terms of position. So I need to work out a fixing at the top that's going to have that bit of variability, so that I can compensate for the slope and the fact that I might be able to push one down a bit further than the other. So I've got enough to do 4 of this setup, and that's going to be the backbone of my beans this summer. So this scaffolding pole is the width of my bed. So I'm going to lay that down here just so that I can get the distance correct for making the fixings. And I'm going to plan on getting about a foot of this in the ground, and then hopefully they'll cross about there. Let's get that a little bit closer together. What I'm going to do is put a bolt through here. I'll show you the bolt. It's about 5 inches. And what that should do is enable me the flexibility to open and close, and even if I tilt a bit, it should be able to compensate a little. So I think that's about right. I'll mark the point on both of these and drill a hole. I've got to drill exactly the same size as the bolt so that I can push it down and I don't have too much movement. That's the plan. See how I get on. So this is how it's going to work, and I'm not going to bash them in now because every time you bash these it will weaken the top a bit, but that's the theory and I think that's going to work well. The big day has arrived. It's chicken time. Mrs. K's been busy celebrating the release of the chickens, and they're going to come marching, I think, at a rate of knots. We'll see. So after months of being cooped up in the coop, the chickens are ready to escape, and here they come. Well, it's not exactly a rush, but they're certainly enjoying the freedom. Well, the netting seems to be working out well, and most of the silkies are pleased to be exploring the new patch. I've come back in to check on the capillary matting, and it seems to have worked really well. So up this end it's nice and damp, and down this end it's nice and damp. So that's really good. I ended up having to fill this to the top because the dripping just wasn't going to fill it in time, which makes sense. The other thing that I've noticed is that the amount of drips is equal to the head of water that's up here. So that isn't very satisfactory, because once it gets lower it'll stop dripping. So I need to suss out quite what to do to get a consistent drip. But the reservoir works well, and when I filled it up I overflowed it and it just drips down onto the bed below. So that's important because I don't want this to fill with water. There is just a small amount of water on the surface here, but it seems to have stabilized at that. And what's interesting is it's pooled in the middle, and I guess that's because of the weight of the water reservoir. But overall I'm pleased with it. I just need to suss out that drip so that it's consistent. So thank you to everybody for their feedback about Spanish bluebells. And these two clumps that we put in, on balance we've decided to remove them. We think that the impact that they may have on our native English bluebell is such that it's probably best not to have them here, and the chance of cross-pollination would then be removed. So they're coming out. What we're putting in is some plants around the pond. Nice camp. So we've mixed up some gravel and compost because we want it to be really free draining, because we're going to put in these saxifrage. And these are beautiful, and there's 8 of them there, and we're going to place them around the pond. Well, Mrs. K is. So the prepared soil and gravel will go into pockets in the rockery, and the saxifrage will go in, and that'll look really pretty. We've also got an oxygenating pond plant, and we're going to put that into this shelf here. I don't know if you can see in there, but there's a whole load of tadpoles, which is fantastic news. So we're just going to make sure we move them on a little bit, and then we'll put that down in there. We may have to put a rock just to keep the foliage above the water. But that's a great oxygenator. It's called, here we go, miniature pennywort, and it'll probably get going quite quickly, and we may well have to cut it back over time, but that's fine. The important thing is, now that we've got some wildlife in the pond, we do need to get some oxygenating plants in there. So Mrs. K's going to do that. I'll bring you back when she's finished. So this is what I've come up with. It's a drip irrigation system, and it just enables me to step down that to a small gauge pipe with a controllable dripper on it, and hopefully that will work. It's going to take some fine tuning, and I've got to take into consideration the extent of the water in the reservoir and how much the plants are taking up in the way of water, and of course the heat in the polytunnel. But that's going to be my attempt to irrigate that shelf during the summer months if I'm away for 2 or 3 days, and that'll be better than what I did have, which was nothing at all. So we'll see. So I'm going to pack this all away because I've got sowing to do. I just wanted to make sure I got everything set up so that when I needed to put it in place, I knew it would work. So let me explain what's going on here. If I'm going to put an irrigation system in, it's going to be principally for the tomatoes. And I need to work out the pot positions to be able to get this irrigation system together. So for now, I've taken the strawberries and put them on top of the pots. Some of these have got potatoes in, so the strawberries will have to go down on the ground when I've finished the planning. But at least that gives me an idea. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tomato plants. And I've got some space over here, but I'm thinking that I'm going to do a couple of peppers in these bigger pots. Now these are the biggest pots I've got, and at the moment the potatoes are in some smaller ones. So I will be using those big pots in all 7 positions. But at least I now know where I need to irrigate. So that's step 1. The trays that I've put underneath, I had to swap around because I've got trays that have got holes in, like these, and I've got trays with no holes in. So I've jigged them around so that the ones that are underneath the tomatoes have got no holes at all. And then if I do get any water that pools at the base of the plants, that's fine. And that will help to water the tomatoes from the base. So quite happy with that, and the water won't drain out and be wasted. To hang the strawberries at this point, because although it's reading a maximum 33 degrees in here today, by the weekend we've got a frost forecast. So it's really important to keep the capability of covering these with fleece, and if they're down at that level I can just put fleece over the top. The next step of the irrigation I think is probably a good 3 or 4 hours work, so it's not happening today. At least I've got everything laid out, and tomorrow, hopefully if the weather stays well, I'll be able to get on with that next step. All gone. Spanish bluebells are no more, and hopefully we can make sure that our English bluebells win through. And the pond has come together really well. So Mrs. K has done a fabulous job of planting up the rockery with that saxifrage, and that hopefully will grow and fall over the rocks, which will look really attractive. And down here we've got the oxygenating plant, which is helping those tadpoles. So the pond moves on. I do hope you enjoyed the video today. If you did, click the subscribe button, click the like button, and if you want updates from me each time I upload a video, click the bell and select all. I do hope you have a great day. Diolch yn fawr.